trusted brand used in homes all across America for decades.
Talc product causes ovarian cancer.
Johnson's baby powder.
Johnson&Johnson started from genuine concern for patient outcomes in hospitals. The three founding brothers were morally committed to bettering humanity. They built a powerhouse of medical advancements that saved countless lives. So, where did it go wrong? How many generations did it take to water down these righteous ideals? How much money did it take to tear the very principles that built Johnson&Johnson's to shreds? What was the price for the lives of millions? Let's look at the beginning of Johnson&Johnson's and the path this company took to get to where it is today. In 1861, the 16-year-old Robert Wood Johnson started working as an apprentice at an apothecary shop in New York City. He spent the next 12 years working his way up the ladder, and by the time Robert was 28, he took the knowledge he had built up at the apothecary and set off on his own with his partner, George Seabury, to manufacture surgical supplies like gauze, bandages, and their most profitable product, a toothpaste geared to whitening teeth. It was this consumer-driven product that grew a relatively mundane company into a very profitable enterprise. J&J would continue to use this formula until the present day, dominate the market with a handful of seemingly inconspicuous shelf-ready items that were commonplace but utterly necessary for every household. Seabury and Johnson was a short-lived partnership. However, a disagreement arose after Robert attended a lecture that would change his whole view of medicine and the route he wanted the company to take. It was a presentation by Sir Joseph Lister, a scientist that proposed the high mortality rates of patients dying from infection were caused by microscopic germs that were prevalent in operating rooms. This was groundbreaking research that overhauled medical practice into what we know it to be today. And even when the world wasn't taking it too seriously, Robert Johnson immediately saw the potential and the enormous need for sterile supplies in hospitals and homes. His partner did not agree, however, so Robert called in his two brothers, James and Edward Johnson. Together, they set up a factory and hired 14 employees to start producing sterile equipment and products geared towards surgical procedures. Robert truly believed that his product could save lives, and by all accounts, it was his mission to make life safer for every human being until his dying day. Their focus on sterile environments and supplies was working. They were the first company to actively push this new line of thinking. Robert's keen eye for necessary change was spot on after all, and their quick actions in this particular field meant that they automatically had a monopoly on the supply chain. Remember that all three brothers, though they came from a very humble household, had become respected members in their fields as adults. Each had a little bit of wealth behind them by now and had enough connections to get the company's foot in the door. Though they were by no means among the richest individuals, they did well enough for themselves that their savings could support such a pursuit without the use of loans or the need to beg for funds. The Johnson brothers did this by their own steam and by their own pockets. Their toothpaste continued to be their best seller, mostly thanks to the public's interest in this rather ordinary product. They had enough profits to extend their employee numbers and building space. J&J had a habit of predicting what the masses wanted and needed. They jumped on those products before the world realized its potential might be the biggest reason for their success. That and the fact that they took the public's feedback to heart. Robert was known to read customer letters himself from behind his desk regularly. It seems that the founder of the empire, at least, had his concerns geared toward the people and not his own bank account. This popular product, coupled with the Spanish-American War and a handful of natural disasters, meant that J&J had plenty of opportunities to push their products. They donated heavily to war efforts and people in need, and the brothers did not shy away from the publicity they received from their charitable acts. Their gauze and bandages didn't just paint them in a good light to the public, they caught the attention of investors and opened up a huge influx of funding. They now had enough resources that the brothers could hire more employees and scientists to focus solely on research. It was two of these new hires, Dr. Fred Kilmer and Earl Dixon, that discovered J&J's two most profitable products to date: Band-Aids and the very baby powder that would take J&J from a decent-sized factory to a megastar in the medical industry. But it would also be this powder that would spell disaster for countless people in the future. Given the Johnson brothers' seemingly well-meaning start, one has to wonder whether they would approve of the lengths their descendants would go to hide the fatal effects of this billion-dollar discovery. Or would they too have been willing to poison the masses in exchange for billions of dollars? But what we do know for sure is that no one had any idea that the main ingredient, talcum, a silicate-based organic compound that grows in the ground, could possibly be dangerous at the time of its discovery. You see, talc is harmless, but it is very similar to asbestos. They require almost identical conditions in which to develop, and the two are almost always found occurring alongside each other. If you're mining for talc, your chances of finding asbestos in the soil are almost certain. But the incredible danger of asbestos wasn't known at the time that talc was starting to be mined and used in mass amounts. So the years went on and this new wonder powder was used far and wide. It did everything from soothing babies' bottoms to managing sweaty armpits, and it was a huge hit among women. And for anyone listening who has lady bits, you'll know girls sweat in more places than just their armpits. Women quickly discovered that the powder was very effective to soak up moisture when they lined their undergarments with it. And Robert Johnson was listening to his customers like he always did, so he marketed a talcum powder aggressively to babies and women, and stores couldn't keep up with supply fast enough. J&J went on to manufacture the first aid kit and first aid booklets to railroad workers. It wasn't long before every railroad, factory, and most households had a proper kit in place. Just think of the millions upon millions of lives these handy little boxes have saved since then. Robert Johnson saw his advancements save lives and witnessed the exponential growth of the company he so very much believed in until his death in 1910. His brother James took over for a little while, and after he retired, Robert's son, Robert Jr., took over as heir. And it looks like Robert Jr. was the last Johnson to live out the legacy of preserving as many lives as he could in a lifetime. But let's get back to the cancer powder in question. Though the potentially dangerous effects of asbestos were theorized about, it wasn't until the 1930s that any serious study was put into it. By the time that it was in our living spaces, inside our food, our cars, and most commonly used for skincare and sweat management, it was already so widely dispersed that the problem was such a huge undertaking to effectively tackle, that it was cheaper to throw money at the problem to squash information than the alternative. But by 1949, the effects of asbestos could no longer be denied. Cases of cancer in mine workers where talc was mined were increasing at alarming rates, and users of the product that contained the carcinogens were starting to show similar signs of illness, but none more so than women. Breast, uterine, and ovarian cancers were skyrocketing. Years of asbestos exposure were rearing its ugly consequences, and by the 1960s, no amount of money could keep the truth hidden anymore. The original founders and their morals were long dead. The company was now worth hundreds of millions, if not already billions in revenue, and J&J shareholders, executives, and the heirs of the empire were completely aware of the literal death they were allowed to put in their products. Their goods specifically target the most vulnerable members of our society: women, children, and the elderly. But the 60s brought a whole new set of rules with it. J&J now had to compete with other major companies in the same industry. Advertisement had become a form of art, and more than ever, people were being pushed to consume. Worst of all, Johnson's was now a leading figure in sales and research. It had dipped its toes into vaccinations and intravenous medicine, not just outward application. If J&J was going to continue to make bank, it needed to keep its reputation squeaky clean. and they took a leaf out of tobacco companies' books, taking the same route that another cancer-causing conglomerate took when it was cornered about the dangers of its use. Academics were put on the payroll, specifically to prove that asbestos in trace amounts was not harmful at all. They went so far as to conceal the findings in their studies from the FDA. In the most recent lawsuits against J&J, it came out that during the 60s and 70s, Johnson&Johnson employed a dermatologist by the name of Albert Kligman. Kligman conducted horrifying tests on inmates. One of his tests was to apply pure asbestos in its raw form to incarcerated prisoners' skin. And J&J weren't the only ones using the prison system as a human zoo to test their medications and products on. Almost every pharmaceutical company at the time is guilty of taking advantage of the thousands of illiterate and vulnerable prisoners at their disposal. Eventually, when the end of the 70s rolled around, the cancer-causing effects of Johnson&Johnson's baby powder could no longer be denied. These scientists downplayed the long-term effects exponentially. Here and there, a few concerned employees and cancer-ridden patients were being paid off. And it worked. They continued to buy time, all the way to 1999. That's when the lawsuits started coming in droves. The first few years, J&J simply bled their accusers dry by dragging out their time in court. The first few thousand cases that were filed never went through their complete trials, but public interest was picking up on the goings-on. Reporters were starting to publish their findings, and before long, lawyers lined up to take up these high-profile cases for free. When the 2010s came about, Johnson's had spent millions in court, and as of today, an estimated $4 billion has been paid by the company in settlements, both in and out of the courtroom. Of the 40,000 lawsuits against Johnson&Johnson, they can count around 20 wins and have had thousands of cases thrown out of court. And still, thousands of cases are pending right now. Finally, in 2022, J&J made their most despicable and cowardly move yet. They tried to file for bankruptcy, despite the company being worth billions of dollars. They were hoping a loophole would save them from the constant stream of accusations. You see, if an enterprise legally declares bankruptcy, all cases against that company cease. But miraculously, the justice system did what it was designed to do for a change. It threw Johnson's claims of bankruptcy out and allowed the court cases to continue. J&J did remove the talc powder from US stores, but they're still selling them everywhere else in the world. In places outside of the US, where the populace is ignorant of the dangers of using J&J products, everywhere around the globe, puffs of asbestos-riddled flakes are selling on soft infant skin. Of the thousands of cases, less than 24 individuals have walked away with a victory and some closure. But what about the other people out there who have been traumatized and victimized? What about the kids who have lost their parents? What about those who are dying right now? Will there ever be justice for them? Are we looking at years and years of court appearances just so J&J can bleed its victims financially dry? Or will the descendants of the original founders dig deep and find within them that moral compass their great-great-grandfathers had held in such high regard? Drop a comment and tell us what you think the outcome will be. If you want more videos like this, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell. And if you can't wait for a new video, check our previous video by clicking this thumbnail on screen. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video in just a second.